Dear friends, dear guests to the 4th Sofia Platform, it is my real pleasure to welcome all of you to Sofia. It is my pleasure to see here some of our old friends, to see also some new partners. This is the 4th edition of an initiative that we started in May of 2011. It was just a couple of months after the Arab Spring started. Back then we thought there were things in the beginning of the Arab transition that kind of sounded familiar to us. We thought there are things that we can share without without preaching, but just to say that we have made a lot of mistakes and our Arab friends might like to know about them and perhaps avoid them. I am not going to go into the detail of the discussion that is ahead of us, but I would like to thank our partners who have been supporting us from the very beginning. First of all, this is the Balkan Trust for Democracy. They have been supporting civil society for 10 years in the Balkans, and they reflect also the thematic focus of the 4th Sofia Platform, which is the discussion about ethnization of politics and the lessons from the Western Balkans for some parts of the Arab world. Then our second partner and supporter is, of course, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation that has been working in shaping the democratic systems in our part of the world that are being active also in the emerging democracies in the Arab world. They know very well also about the hurdles of a transition and have been extremely important also throughout the way. And of course, I would like to thank to the European Commission and its representation in Sofia, the building we are in. They have been extremely kind to offer us their support for this event and to host us. But also their support, I think, reflects the EU's new approach towards the MENA region, since the EU and MENA are closest neighbors. With this, I am pleased to give the floor to our first speaker in the opening session, and this is the European Commissioner, Mrs. Kristalina Georgieva.
The working language is English, but we're in Bulgaria, so first, добър ден на всички. Много се радвам да видя толкова много хора заинтересовани от дискусията, която съм сигурна ще бъде не само интересна, ще бъде продуктивна дискусия днес и утре. And now back to the official language. Good afternoon. My honor to be here among the speakers of a two-day discussion that I'm sure would be very productive. I want to first thank the Sofia Platform, the Center for Liberal Strategies, the German Marshall Fund, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and European Council on Foreign Relations for bringing a very impressive number of speakers with competencies that are undoubtedly going to lead us to come out of these 2 days with a better understanding of what the challenges are and what the way forward is. I will start with a very brief presentation of what the European Union is doing in the context of the Arab Spring, but the bulk of my presentation will focus on the Syria crisis. This is the crisis that has taken most of my time over the last 2 years and will continue to be on the top of the priorities of my service, of the humanitarian service of the Commission for for years to come. As you know, the Arab Spring created euphoria and expectations. It also led to a significant revisiting of approaches taken by globally, but also for us in the European Union. And perhaps if I am to sum up what is different now vis-à-vis the days before the Arab Spring, I would stress three things. One, in the European Union, there is an ongoing determination to learn from past mistakes and make sure we don't repeat them. And obviously one of the mistakes of the past was very comfortable coexistence with non-democratic leadership and a sense that as long as there is order, we can close an eye on what is happening underneath. But also a lesson that, and we know it very well, and I'm sure Nickolay Mladenov will also talk about it, that we know so very well in the Eastern European countries that a transition is a very painful and slow process. I remember 2 years ago visiting Myanmar and meeting with Aung San Suu Kyi, and she asked me, what is the most important thing now that was exactly at the beginning of transformation there? What is the one most important thing that I need to keep on the top of my mind? And my answer was, after euphoria, there will be disappointment. And how you manage this transition from euphoria to disappointment is going to be an important determinant of your success. And that, of course, applies to the Arab Spring. The second very important message from the EU is that we have very quickly defined simple, straightforward principles for engagement. And there are two. One is the famous more for more. And of course, everybody who would think logically knows that more for more also means less for less. And if you have the stomach for it, none for none. But very important to have the incentive framework. You do more in reforms, we do more for you. And that what is this more is defined with the so-called 3M, money, mobility, markets. And fortunately, that actually translates also in 3P in Bulgarian: пари, пазари и къде е? И подвижност. Благодаря много, Даниел. Знам, че бяха три, да можем да си и на български да ги запомним като 3П. And the third important message from Europe is that we recognize that the only way for us to make progress is if there is mutual accountability. And I know that people more competent than me on this would come back to this issue. But the fundamental approach that we need to take is to recognize that in the world we live in, no more you can set up your relations on a 10-year basis in the future. We have to have a lot of agility in how we interact and a lot of ability to anticipate change and then act early so we can have the foresight of defining engagement as events change. One of the during this process of the Arab Spring, on 2 occasions, my team and I were very much in the middle, in the center of events. The first time was Libya, when we had to take extremely quickly measures to help people evacuate our own nationals, but also migrant workers who have fled to neighboring countries, and help to bring down the wounds, the humanitarian wounds of the war. And the second time in Yemen, a similarly enormous humanitarian catastrophe, a country that was in trouble before, to make sure that the transition does not bring even more misery on people. But the case which is profoundly the most difficult is the Syria crisis. You will be discussing later in details. Obviously, until September this year, that was one of the most demonstrable failures of diplomacy, a case that didn't give us much hope in the ability of the Security Council to cope with a crisis of that proportion. But from a human point of view, the most dramatic humanitarian catastrophe of modern times. You can compare it to any crisis we know. I usually compare it to the ex-Yugoslavia crisis because they are similar. A middle-income country falls into a conflict with huge impact on vulnerable people. In the ex-Yugoslavia crisis, there were some 2 million people internally displaced and 700,000 refugees in neighboring countries and in Europe primarily. With the Syria crisis today, we have 5 million people internally displaced and 2.2 million refugees and counting. We can sum up the tragedy, the madness of the Syria conflict just by looking into what has happened in the last 1 year. In 1 year, the people who died from the conflict in Syria increased more than 4 times, from 27,000 victims to 115,000. The people pushed out of their homes have increased some 4 times, from 1.2 million to close to 5, actually more than 4 times. But the most dramatic impact of the crisis is the number of refugees has increased 8 times. 8 times, from 270,000 a year ago to 2.2 million now. When we look at the impact of the crisis, the reason we say in the humanitarian community we are incredibly worried of where we are and what next is going to come is not only the sheer magnitude. It is also the longevity of the crisis. We are still to see credible evidence that an end is in sight. It is also the regional impact, the risk it imposes, especially on Lebanon, 800,000 refugees in a country that is vulnerable on its own, but also on Jordan, Turkey, strong country, but it has 660,000 registered refugees. And of course, we now feel the spillover impact in Europe. While today the number of Syrian refugees in Europe is relatively not large, 50,000 people, around 50,000 people. Of those, more than half are in 2 European countries. Do you know where they are? No? Germany and Sweden.